All set. I can kick this off. So thank you everyone for joining and welcome to the day 4 of the Marketing Cloud Developer Bootcamp. So I'm joined by Matthew and Naji today. Matthew is going to talk all about the data management section of the developer certification, which occupies the 22% of the exam. So before we get started, I would like to announce about the swag for this bootcamp. So we do have a few certification vouchers. I think 1 out of 10 people would be able to get a certification voucher. We are trying to get more. So there are good chances that you would be able to win the voucher. The process for that is that I am going to send a form to you in a couple of minutes. So fill that form with your details, and the next session, Ask Me Anything panel, which is next Tuesday, we will be doing a raffle, a duck race, or similar to that, or something similar. So we will pick the winners from that raffle, and they will be eligible to get the vouchers. And we do have some special swag as well today. Matt is going to do some Kahoot game. He has some good example questions from the exam. So the winner from the Kahoot game would also get some swag. We haven't yet decided on what that is, but they will be eligible to get the swag. And I would like to inform about the upcoming session, the Ask Me Anything panel. So we have Vlad, Elliot, Greg, and Jenna joining us on that day. I will also send a form where you can fill in your questions, and the SMEs would be able to answer your questions during that day. And you would also have the opportunity to post the questions during the session as well. And about the recordings of this session, we will be posting the recording on the YouTube channel. That will be available in the first week of August, along with all the recordings from this bootcamp. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Matt.
Great. Thank you. And I'll just go do a quick introduction on myself. So I'm a lead consultant at Horizontal Digital. We're a full service digital agency that is based out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. We're kind of full 360 customer experience engagement and success, which means that we do content management, marketing automation, and CRM consulting. As for myself, I've got 16 years in marketing technology. I would say the back half I spent primarily in content management. And then, probably in the last 6 to 8 years, I've been focusing on marketing automation, specifically Marketing Cloud. I'm also a leader of the Twin Cities Salesforce Marketing Cloud group, and we do plenty of other virtual sessions just like this. So if you're interested in kind of if you can't get enough Marketing Cloud, check us out. It's the Twin Cities B2C Marketing Cloud user group. And so, yeah, and the other thing is like, we would love to talk to you if you're interested in making a move in a job in consulting. We're hiring. And so please look me up on LinkedIn. We can connect and talk about stuff afterwards if you're interested in making a move into Salesforce Marketing Cloud development. So to kind of tee things up today, I am going to scoot ahead to my slides here. So we're going to be covering data management, which is 22% of the total score of the exam. And I've broken it down into the 5 major sections of that component. We're going to cover importing data. We're going to cover how we export and extract data out of Marketing Cloud, how we can do some manipulation of data using structured query languages, or SQL, and how we can also kind of access some of the system data views and then also use SQL to kind of take advantage of that. We'll briefly talk about send logs, why those are a goodness, and then we'll also talk about the contact deletion process. So in terms of format, what we're going to cover over the next 90 minutes, and we've got probably a good amount of time here, is that I'm going to cover each major theme here. We're going to talk about these things at kind of a high level. We'll talk about some basics about each of these components, best practices. When there are things that I know that I've seen on the developer exam, and Jasna, also keep me honest here, if you've seen something like this on the exam, please speak up, and then because we'll be calling out to pay special attention to certain things. Hopefully you can have a little bit of fun on the way. We've got some trivia at the end. And at the end, we'll do some Q&A to field your questions. In terms of an overall goal for today, I kind of want to give you a primer on what's covered in this section. This is not going to be developer training. We're going to cover aspects of SQL. I would expect that we'll hone in on parts of SQL that are important for you to study. If you don't have a lot of SQL knowledge right now, that's okay. We'll talk about some of the main functions that are going to be covered in the exam, and you can brush up outside. I do have some syntax that I can go over today, but I don't want us to get too in the weeds in terms of syntax. The slides are here. You'll be able to download them after the session, so you'll be able to kind of review this on your own time. Also in the deck will be links to all of the pertinent documentation and other training materials that I think would be helpful for passing this component of the exam. Okay, so with that, let's get started. We'll start talking about importing data. And so what I'm going to be doing is spitting back a little bit of Salesforce and how they say how to prepare for each one of these sections. And so they say you want to be able to configure an import activity using various file formats within Marketing Cloud. What does that translate to? That translates to basically how do we use import activities within Automation Studio to kind of get data where we need it to go and to get it in the proper format. There's a lot of different ways to get data into Marketing Cloud. Some of the methods I have listed here are through the typical user interface. We're not going to cover that because that should have already been covered in the specialist and admin exam. We're going to cover how things pertain to the SFTP and automations. That's where we're going to focus today. And then other things like using REST and SOAP APIs to get data into the platform, that was probably covered in the API section, is not covered in today's section. So in order to get data into the secure FTP, we can start with file locations. File locations are something that you'd be able to set up within the application's administration screens. They're basically ways for you to set up different folder locations within the secure FTP. The goal here is to kind of name different file locations so that we have different targets to send files to. And then once we drop a file into the secure FTP, we have a few different ways in order to process and handle that data, mostly through two different types of automation. So we'll cover each of those two. And so yeah, and so the Automation Studio as a whole, we've got mostly three major different types of activities that we can leverage to kind of manipulate data. I'll cover imports first, then we'll go over file transfers, then we'll switch to exports and talk about data extracts after that. So, yeah, onto imports. They are used to update data within Marketing Cloud from an external source. So that could be data that is being dropped from your ERP. It could be data that's being dropped from some automation platform. It could be sent from a user. But it's basically, a secure file transfer protocol, and we can create a import activity to consume that data in Marketing Cloud. And so, you kind of need to know some of the specifics on how imports work in Automation Studio. And then for the exam, the really important part to hone in on is what type of activities you want to be able to run and in what order those activities need to run in. They're very kind of specific on the order of operations, because order of operations is really important. So kind of going through some of the basic things, and I'm not going to go through all of these, but I've got some good notes here on file imports. Typically, the files that you're going to be processing in terms of an import activity are going to be comma separated value files, CSV files, or text files. And you can process many different types of delimited files. The most common ones that come across are going to be tab and comma delimited files. You can customize it and handle delimiters of almost any type. So if you have pipe delimited information, or if you have colon separators, those are all things that can be set up within an import activity. In terms of encoding, we're typically processing UTF-8 or UTF-16 character data. And then in terms of being able to like all of the other, oh, and we've got some chat stuff coming up. So JB, if you could do me a favor and keep an eye on the chat.
Sure, Matt. We will address all the questions at the end of the session. So if there's anything related to the topic that you're currently discussing, then I will quickly interrupt you.
That's
so
perfect.
Raji and I will be monitoring the chat as well.
I'd be really
Thank
happy
you.
to answer questions as they come up.
Okay.
And so some of the other options that are available in an import activity is if you want to be able to preserve any commas that are in imported text. So like if there is a title or anything that might include something like a comma that's going to throw off your import process, you want to check the option to respect double quotes as a text delimiter. It's going to separate all your values with double quotes, and then it will import data that is within those double quotes. And one of the other options is if you want to continue your import, if it encounters bad data rows, choose to skip rows with bad data. I highly recommend doing this because it's the difference between a partial failure and a total failure. If you don't have this checked and you encounter one bad row of data, the import process will fail and you won't get any data imported. I like to sometimes keep this checked because it means that we could, even if there are a few rows that are being thrown off by the import process, we'll get 98, 99%, and we'll focus on the other 1% in a fix. All right, slides, there we go. You know, and then there's some other advanced options that you can set up for a file import. And, you know, some of these import options are all kind of for stopping the automation or the import process if there are specifics about the age or time of that file. So you might want to check these, the first one, if there is an import that's already happened recently. And so let's say, for example, you have a file drop automation and you want it to only run every 4 hours, but another one gets dropped before that threshold, you can skip that import if a file gets dropped in there. Another one that I see checked more commonly is to abort the import if the file is older than a certain age. So this is an option to consider for scheduled automations when they're running at specific intervals. So imagine you've got an automation that's running, looking for a file to import, and that file doesn't land in the FTP. When that happens, you can check this box to kind of stop the import process if the latest file that's in the FTP is pretty old. And then to offset your import times to adjust for time differences in the FTP, select a system buffer here. You know, I've got to say, and I want to try to stay honest on this stuff as much as I can. I have tested this system buffer thing, and I have not found a lot of evidence that suggests that I'm getting a lot of. I haven't seen failures due to a system buffer. I'd be happy to talk to other folks and get their experiences on this, but I haven't seen a lot of utility in the system buffer. Setting it to all sorts of different hours and trying files of different ages doesn't really yield anything, in my opinion, or at least in my experience here. But you can certainly check it, and it's to offset time differences between the FTPs. So if you're importing from a different FTP in a different time zone, you might want to apply a system buffer. Okay. Here's a piece that may come up on the exam when it comes to file imports. There are ways to be able to kind of set date variables in how you are looking for certain file formats. So let's say, for example, you want to be able to import a customer file, and a customer file is getting dropped in the FTP on a regular basis, and it's using kind of like a date timestamp for whatever the latest Delta file of that contact was. You can train Marketing Cloud to kind of accept some of those date variables here by using the double percent symbols with each segment of that year, month, day, hour, minute, second. And so they may trip you up sometimes on things like, you know, the number of percentages that you'll see, and sometimes you won't see percentages close before another one opens. And that's just something to look for. They always try to get you on little stuff like that in the exam. Okay. And there's two main sources for imports. Hopefully we've all kind of gone through this on the specialist and admin exam. You can send it to either data extensions or lists. Within data extensions, you can send it to almost any data extension that you can think of. Auto suppression lists count as a data extension here. From a list perspective, you can import into both SMS and email lists, as well as publication lists and suppression lists. So all those are viable options in terms of being able to import. And then there are mapping options. And so this is basically instructing the import where to map the columns that are in the file to fields or parameters that are in the import here. And so, we can map things by header rows, ordinals, or manuals. None of this stuff really comes up in the exam for a developer, but I just thought I'd include it here for good measure. And then the various actions that you can take, which would be add an update, or overwrite. One thing I want to say about some of the actions in terms of performance, when we're talking about like big operations and we're moving big files, I would say it's always better to be able to handle smaller Delta files than major overwrites and major updates. So if you're setting up a process where you need to be able to get data from another system into Marketing Cloud, only import the data that you need. And so if like a bad example would be a customer is sending their entire customer record over, once every hour. That's certainly not going to be optimized. You definitely want to try to update only the fields that are changing. All right. So that's it for imports. Let's talk a little bit about file transfers. They're used for a lot of things. Unzipping, basically kind of managing a lot of files once they are in the FTP. So if we need to unzip a file, it's going to drop the unzip file in the same folder. If you need to decrypt files, that is going to be a process that requires keys set up in your private key section. Can handle things like PGP and GPG decryption. And so, in terms of being able to import data, you'll need to set up a private key. PGP encryption and GPG have two different keys. There are public keys and private keys. A public key is a key that you hand out to other systems in order to encode data and send it to Marketing Cloud. The private key is the key that you use and keep only in the platform to decode that data. So it's kind of like two sets of decoder, an encoder ring and a decoder ring. In addition to unzipping and decrypting files, file transfer activities are also useful for transferring files. And so you can transfer files to the FTP. You can also transfer them to external FTPs. And those external FTPs can all get set up in the file locations area of setup. One thing to remember is that when you are receiving files in the FTP, Marketing Cloud guarantees that those files will be kept for up to 21, or for at least 21 days, I should say, at least 21 days. Files can sometimes stay on there for longer than 21 days, but 21 days is the amount of days that they promise. Developer exams, a lot of Salesforce exams ask for a lot of little specifics like this. And so you may expect to see a question on there saying, well, how long does the file stay on the FTP? The answer is 21 days. And you heard it here. Okay. Any questions on importing data? We'll kind of circle back and talk a little bit about how we structure some of these things together in an automation with imports and file transfers. And once we cover exports and extracts.
As of now, we do not see any questions on the import activities, Matt. You may continue with the next topic.
Okay. So we're going to cover exports and extracts of data. And so, Salesforce wants to know, in a given scenario, can you explain different ways to extract data from Marketing Cloud? We use data extracts for a lot of different things in the platform. We use it for converting files, extracting data from different data extensions, producing tracking extracts, which can produce CSV files of massive amounts of behavioral and performance and system data. and tons of other different purposes. That could be compressing files or moving files within the FTP, producing an audit trail extract. And so there's tons of different use cases for creating a data extract activity. You know, to kind of give you a real world scenario for data extract activities, the most common one that I encounter is we've got a data extension that contains subscriber data or some type of performance data, and we need to get it off platform. So what we would typically do is set up a data extract to create a CSV file. And that CSV file is going to get sent to the Marketing Cloud Safehouse. And then we would use a file transfer activity after that to move it to the FTP or another external FTP. So the data extract activity is either manipulating a file or it's going to move a file from some record in the platform, like a data extension, and then put it in the Marketing Cloud Safehouse. The Safehouse is not an area where we have there's a user interface. It's basically like system memory. And so it's kind of like a holding place where we can do something else with it. But there's really nothing that we can do with things in the Safehouse other than another activity. All right. A big part of data extracts can be tracking extracts. You know, a lot of clients utilize tracking extracts to pull a lot of data out of the platform and send it to like either a data lake or another analytical platform in order to get processed and you know, compared with other larger engagement data sets. And so when you configure a data extract activity, you have the ability to select a ton of different factors, and there really are probably more than I can get into in the course of this session, considering all the other material we need to get through. But it's something that's definitely worth exploring and understanding. So I've got the documentation listed here for folks to kind of go and do a little extra reading to figure out how to set up a tracking extract. Yeah, typically when you need to move big data out of the platform that is related to some of your system data, a tracking extract can certainly help. All right. So let's talk about how we thread all of these things together then in automation. We've talked about imports, we've talked about file transfers, and we've talked about data extracts. Those three are always going to come up on the exam in some form or another.
Matt, I want to
yeah.
interrupt here. So this is about the data extracts. How do you manage extracts for historical tracking data, which is older than 90 days?
Older than 90 days?
Mm-hmm.
Well, a tracking extract, that's a good question. I believe, I don't know. I'd have to go refer to the documentation on that. I know that, you know, we'll talk about data views in a little bit, and data views can capture data beyond 180 days. And there are ways to kind of build more long-term extracts within the platform. And so we could write a SQL query to preserve, you know, system data into like an archive. And then we can also perform activities off of that. When it comes to the date requirements of a tracking extract, I don't know the specifics on that. And you know, that's another thing about me, folks, is that if I don't know a specific thing, I'm going to tell you. So that is probably something that we could all research later.
Not a problem at all, Matt. So we can even continue this discussion in the next session. That if any of the members on the panel may have answer to that. So I'm going to add this question as well. To support, I see some question by David. Custom tracking extract request to support, and it has a cost.
Yeah, so what David's getting at is there are ways to set up custom data extracts. And so if you need a file in a specific format, or if you need the certain data, and it sounds David saying the answer here is that you would have to set up a custom data extract. Mm-hmm. Custom data extracts all require a services engagement.
That makes sense.
We do have another question. Can you decide what time zone will be used for data variables while data is being exported or imported?
You can certainly set the time zone. It will likely be defaulted to whatever your user type is. That is a great question and one I've never seen on the exam.
Yeah, I didn't remember. Yeah.
All right. And so, let's talk a little bit about order of operations here. If we're moving files, and chances are, if any of you guys have been, administering Marketing Cloud, a lot of this stuff should already be pretty obvious. We can't transfer a file until we've extracted it into the safe house, and so that will always come up in the exam. You got to extract first, and then you do a file transfer. When it comes to things like a data extract, there are also cases where you need to do 2 data extracts. I haven't seen that on the exam, but sometimes there's a scenario where we need to, let's say, export data into the safe house. The next step is we need to compress it, or we need to encrypt it, or we need to convert it from UTF-16 into UTF-8. That's a common scenario for Interaction Studio. And so you'll need to do 2 data extracts in a row in order to kind of convert that data before you follow up with your file transfer activity to move it off platform. And then file imports, they don't necessarily need to be preceded by any other type of operation unless there is some type of unzip or conversion activity that needs to happen before it. So there will be questions about a file coming in that is compressed, and you probably need to run shoot, now I can't remember if it was data extract or file transfer. I'm gonna have to go back to my notes. Yeah, so these unzipping is a file transfer. So it would be a file transfer first to unzip that file. Same thing for decrypting a file, and then an import activity to import it. Okay. So that kind of covers the section on imports and exports. Oh, there's another. So that question on time zones. Let's if the question is scheduling for different time zones, you can schedule it in Automation Studio. And so you can set an automation to run in Central Time or IST or whatever your time zone is. The thing to always keep track of is that it will default to whatever time zone your user is set for. So if you're creating users in the platform, especially if you're working across multiple different time zones and your users that you're setting up are in a different time zone than you, try to set their time zone as the area that they're in, because we always tend to think about time from our particular part of the world. And so when someone schedules an automation to run at 6 a.m. and expecting it to run at Central Time in the United States, and their time zone is actually set up as India Standard Time, that's going to cause a surprise because they may not always be looking at those particular details when they're scheduling automation. So always make sure that people are really clear on seeing the time zone as it's set up in the schedule. All right, we're going to jump forward to SQL and data manipulation. And so this is probably one of the more complex parts of this section of the exam. And so my goal here is I'm going to go through a lot of different functions and a lot of different use cases. And I expect that a lot of folks they have varying levels of SQL experience. And you do not need to be a SQL master in order to pass the exam. In order to pass the exam in terms of SQL questions, you have to understand some basic functions. And I would really, really recommend that if you're just getting started or not feeling totally confident about your SQL skills, to use some of the links that I have listed in some of the forthcoming slides, I'm going to link off to the W3C website where you can kind of try out a lot of different SQL functions. The other thing to do is, create a playground in your Marketing Cloud org where you can put in some sample data and kind of perform some of your own SQL functions so you can kind of test out things. In terms of the exam, they're going to ask you questions on what types of SQL are going to produce desired results, and then some best practices. So we'll follow up with some best practices in here too. So, in broad terms, we use SQL quite a lot, and it gets used to kind of query data extensions and certain system data views. Depending on the type of account you have, whether you have an Enterprise 2.0 account or on your behalf or Enterprise 1.0, certain data extensions and system views are going to be available and some won't. The one that always seems to come up maybe in practice, but not necessarily in the exam, is being able to access subscriber profile attributes. Those are available within Enterprise 2.0, but not available in Enterprise 1.0. So while you can query things like, list membership in both Enterprise 1.0 and 2.0, you can't pull those profile attributes in 1.0. Other thing about SQL queries in Marketing Cloud is we can only write select statements here. We can't write any inserts. We can't write any updates. There are workarounds. And I don't think that Salesforce is officially wanting to teach everyone workarounds to how to get around manipulating data using SQL. But using some clever workarounds, I'm sure you can find ways to do it. Often I've seen people using staging data extensions as a way to do this. So they'll perform a particular function and maybe eliminate a few different rows from a data extension and then send that data to a staging data extension and move the data back into the master data extension. It's hackery at its finest. And so, they can only, the query activities are basically a SQL statement that can be placed into an automation. They can be run one at a time, or they can be run in series. The thing I'll say about SQL queries and Marketing Cloud is that it looks like SQL, and it feels like SQL, but there are some parts about it that go through an optimizer, and the end product that Marketing Cloud is going to be processing is not always going to be what you see on the screen. A case in point of that is like wildcards, and we'll get into that a little bit later. So in terms of like optimizing, Marketing Cloud is going to be doing a lot of optimizing for you. I've actually tested some of this and written some pretty bad not optimized queries and run them against optimized queries. And it does seem like some of these things are being optimized in the background. I'll talk a little bit about optimization, and there'll be some bonus points out there for folks that can spot the optimized query between two. And we'll get into that in a little bit. All queries in Marketing Cloud will time out after 30 minutes of running. So if you've got a big, ugly query out there where you're joining several sets of data together and it's got millions of rows and the system just chokes, it's going to do that at the 30-minute mark, and your query will fail. There are plenty of ways to kind of get around that, and I'll talk a little bit about best practices in a minute. I'll just keep going through some of the facts here. Marketing Cloud uses Transact SQL. So if you're interested in custom functions, or if you're interested in special things that Microsoft's Transact SQL language allow you to do, like partitioning and things like running an over command, you can certainly do that. Transact SQL allows you to do that. And it runs on Microsoft SQL 2016. So the impact there is not huge. Kyle's asking a question here: is the timeout per query activity or per automation? The timeout is per query. So what that means in some of the optimized strategies that I'll talk about is kind of breaking your query down into several chunks. And so each step of that query has its own timeout of 30 minutes. So if what you want to do is kind of make some staging queries so that they run in series, that's an easy workaround to a one large query to rule it all. Okay. Some things that you're not going to be able to do with SQL queries that you may be used to doing if you are kind of into heavy database administration is you cannot create processes ahead of time, and you can't use like some specific platform commands. Those are all kind of locked out. We're basically working with straight up select statements here for the most part. All right. And then in terms of when to use SQL, this is not stuff that you would probably need to pass the developer exam, but just to be a good developer, I want to make sure that I can, impart some of this knowledge here. SQL is a powerful tool, but it is absolutely not the only tool for segmentation in Marketing Cloud. You have to consider the user experience all the time. And there's going to be a lot of cases where developers are going to be working alongside marketers and people that need to be able to kind of run their own segmentation. And so I hesitate to use SQL in a lot of scenarios when I know that I'm going to be working with users that need drag and drop declarative tools. And I use SQL as almost like a last ditch effort to make, because there is no other way for me to organize this data for a user to segment it. I don't particularly like to set up a lot of new accounts using SQL just because I can almost always find a better way to be able to segment data. Certainly, there are some folks out there that would love to use Marketing Cloud as a data processing platform, and SQL kind of gives you a lot of tools to run wild with that. But I would say, good data design is also is always a factor that I consider when I am presented with the need to go to SQL and build queries there. One of the most common things, oh, there's actually a question here. Let me pull that up. So David is saying that filtering activities for segmentation always overwrites, which is a problem. Changing data in general in Marketing Cloud is a problem. If for example, in SQL isn't any different here. So like if, for example, I want to, I schedule an email, or I'm doing an A/B test of an email that's being sent, and that data changes before my winner is selected. Anytime that date extension is being changed, it's going to cause that send to fail or view as web page to fail and things like that. So that's one of the reasons why, I think, yes, you're right, overwriting, it will always overwrite, but there's plenty of other holes in the armor that we have to consider. Okay. So yes, and David's saying is, but you can append, and that's absolutely true. And so you can work with smaller sets of data through SQL. Again, like, you are absolutely right, but what I'm trying to get at here is let's consider the user and consider their experience. If we can find a way for them to be able to segment and filter their data without a developer having to be in there and set up a process for them, that is a good design, in my opinion, because it's adding tech debt to the platform, and I only like to add tech debt to a platform when there's a really, really good reason for it. So one of those reasons is listed here as the third bullet. I often use SQL to kind of denormalize data that's coming in from Salesforce. Marketers need to be able to access a lot of different fields of data, and some of those are coming from very different objects in Salesforce. When we set up the connector in Marketing Cloud, and that data gets passed through a synchronized data extension, it's all coming over an individual object form. So if I want to be able to build an email list for my marketers that have, let's say, opportunity data, or maybe account-based data or user data, like let's say I want to be able to put a person's account owner on a data extension, we'll go through a process called denormalization, where we join some of that data through SQL in order to prepare it so that when a person is going to be building their email, all of the fields that they need for personalization will be in that one particular data extension, and they don't have to write any AMP script in order to write lookups across objects. All right. So I kind of hinted at this, and so this is when not to use SQL here. And so I would say sometimes, like, and this is what we talked about in the last slide, when there are simpler, more declarative segmentations options that are available to your users. If they can get what they need by building a drag and drop filter, that's fantastic. We don't necessarily need to write SQL for that. You know, and then other situations that are on the complete other end of the spectrum, if there needs to be some very heavy duty data processing, and we're working with millions and millions of rows, and we are starting to, you know, come to the limits of what the platform can handle. Marketing Cloud is an operational tool. It is there to help you, you know, build and send emails. It is not designed to be a high performance data manipulation platform. And there are other platforms that are excellent at being able to run high powered queries. And then sometimes what we've seen in situations is to run that, you know, process that data off platform and then move it back into Marketing Cloud in a final state. Okay. So that's kind of some of the basics. Let's try to zero in here on some of the things that you're going to need to know for the exam. And a lot of these things are kind of syntax related. So some simple stuff, be able to differentiate how to write different conditional clauses. That's a where clause, which is the simplest one, a case statement, which you'd be including in your select, a having statement, which is going to be in a aggregate function, join clauses. So know the different types of joins, different, hold on a second here. So your different aggregate queries here. So that would be being able to pull groups of data together. So we'll go over all of those. Being able to limit and order your results using some of the functions listed. Being able to convert data from one type to another, especially if we're trying to compare, you know, decimal data or numeric data that's coming in a text form, or converting text data that would be a date into a date format. Those are all common scenarios. Being able to find unique records within a query, performing all sorts of different date-based functions, and I'll go through a few examples here on how to compare dates and use those for queries. Being able to replace, locate, and trim data. So if we need to do some slight data manipulation here in order to clean up some data, and then also how to access some of the system data views. All right. A couple questions before we go to the next screen. So Naji hasn't seen more than 4 SQL queries in an automation. That's, you know, there are some out there, and depending on some things, we may see more. For single purpose, you could be right. There may not be a lot of options a lot of scenarios to write more than 4, but really, you know, let's try to focus on what the actual scenarios are, and, you know, it could be 4 is sometimes too much. The next question is, should you worry about data locking when developing and schedule SQL queries? No. So that is not a thing in Marketing Cloud. And so data locks, they don't really happen, which can be kind of messy. And so we'll talk a little bit about some ways to kind of manage that, knowing that locks aren't really a thing. And so the one that really matters for this is kind of your send logs, because send logs are kind of being written to and read from at the same time. And so while there's no locks, they just kind of instruct you to work around it. And so let's see. Let's jump into the next stuff here. So we'll talk about conditional clauses first. If you're writing a very basic SQL query, you're going to start with a where clause. And a where clause is basically applying conditions to the basic rows that you're selecting. So scenario here is maybe I want to be able to pull all of my contacts from my synchronized data extension. And I want to be able to find contacts that have an update, like a date that they've ones that have been modified or recently created within the last 24 hours. I would include that condition, the date that they've been recently modified or created, in a where clause. A case statement is a condition that gets put in the select area. So when we're starting to figure out what types of fields we want to be able to pull from our query, we can write a case statement to say in one condition, retrieve this data, and the other condition, let's retrieve that data. And I'll show you in a kind of a syntax how that works. Having gets is a condition that gets applied to whenever we're performing like an aggregate function. And so if we're trying to group data together, the having clause helps us apply conditions to how those groups get defined or grouped. So here's a sample SQL query that contains all of those pieces together. So at the very top, we're going to write a select query, which means we're going to pull data from a data source. And the next thing is we're going to include an aggregate function here in order to include this group by and having down at the bottom. So we're going to look for, and I'll cover this in a next section. We're going to look for the max value of a specific column, and then we're going to follow it up with a case. And so a case basically follows this format where we can write when a certain condition happens, then we can write a specific output. And so, you know, a common scenario here is like if you are looking to like provide your own formatting for something and group data into kind of your own buckets here, or if people meet certain conditions and you want to be able to provide some extra organization, then cases are a pretty good option for you there. You're able to write as many conditions as you want. And then at the end, you can write an else clause and put a final result that doesn't meet any of the conditions below. When you're finished, you need to end that case statement and give it an alias. Then back out down into conditionals here. We talked about where before. Where gets declared after the from statement. So once we tell SQL what we're looking for, we're looking to select data here from a specific database, and then where conditions apply. So this is going to be applying conditions based off of all the rows that are getting returned. I'll talk about aggregate stuff in a minute here, but in order to kind of perform conditional statements on aggregates, we may sometimes need to group people together. And then having follows typically that group clause in order to provide some conditional logic there. Let's talk about joins. So joining is a super common thing. And like I talked about before, denormalizing data is a real thing in terms of Marketing Cloud and being able to build operable data extensions for your users. And so you'll have a variety of different joins that you can use in order to do that. And the type of join that you use makes a big difference on the result of the data that you're going to get. You'll have mostly 4 different types. There's some wild ones out there. There's like a Cartesian join and there's a cross apply. I'm not going to get into those scenarios. We're just going to talk about the basics here: left, right, inner, and full outer join. A inner join is kind of matching only things that kind of consist on records that have matches on both sides. So if I'm comparing, let's say I want to be able to pull in customers, and I also want to be able to join orders with customers, a inner join will only pull customers that have orders, for example. If I want to do a left join or a right join, it's going to basically return all the data from either the left side or the right side, and then it's going to append any matches from the opposite side. So if we're talking again about just joining customers with orders, if there are customers that don't have orders, A inner join will not return any results for customers that have no orders. But if there are customers that don't have orders and we do a left join, for example, we will get all of our customers, and any customers that don't have orders will get null data returned. They'll still be in the query, they'll still be in the results, but there will be null data in any of the order fields for that particular result. Differentiating between a left join and a right join, you know, it all kind of depends on which one you choose first. And so if you want to join, you know, data from the left side, make sure that that is, I'll show you actually a clause here in a second to kind of differentiate. And then a full outer join is going to basically pull both sets of data together. And that's the simplest way to state it. You probably will need to know the difference between an inner join and a left join or a right join in the exam. So let's see here. Oh, I don't have syntax here for a left join, darn. But I do have that linked. So if you want to be able to kind of compare the syntax between a left join and a right join and how that works, then I encourage you to use the links that are in this document. So basically, when we're joining data together, we start with a single data extension or a single data source. And in this example, we've got orders. And when we perform like an inner join, we follow it with the data extension that we're going to join it to. And then we have to decide how we're going to what types of keys are going to merge that data together. And so we're going to choose here how those two things get merged and what data is common between these two that's going to allow them to join. And so in this case, when we're talking about orders and customers, each one of those has a customer ID. So whenever there is a match on orders and customers, that data will join together. The other thing is that there's just a slight change here between this syntax and this syntax. There's a way to kind of create aliases for all the different tables. So in the first example, we're writing the orders data extension, and we have to reference the table name from every column that we're going to be returning in the query. We can make our lives a little bit simpler by creating aliases here. So you see in this second example, when we're pulling data from orders, we're going to give a nickname of O. So instead of having to write orders every time, we're just going to do O.orderID. So we do the table name dot field name in order to declare those different fields. All right, let's talk about how to aggregate data. And so like in aggregate it can do a number of different things here. We can pull minimum and maximum data. So if I want to be able to look at, you know, a certain column that has like a value in it, let's say a date or a purchase amount, I would be able to use aggregate data to be able to return whatever the largest or whatever the smallest value of that grouped data was. Then there are some other things that allow us to kind of perform some math on them. We can count the number of rows that are returned when we're performing an aggregate query. Sometimes I use count to try to figure out if there are duplicates in my all subscribers table. And so I will count how many subscribers come back with a matching email address. You know, sometimes we need to run averages and other things like sum on a particular field. And so if we need to kind of pull together, you know, perhaps how many purchases a person has had in a specific time, or how many times someone has opened a particular email over a course of time, those things like sum would be able to help with there. And then when we're kind of aggregating data, we need to sometimes create groupings of data. And so in order to create groupings of data that get returned, we'll need to use a group by function. And I've got all the documentation listed here to kind of go through some examples. There's a little syntax I'll show here on how to use both the group by and the average aggregate functions. So, you know, if you are going to, let's see here, this one is just simply returning results in groups. And so we're basically going to go out and select some columns from a table where certain conditions apply, and then we can just simply group by columns, a single column or multiple columns. The exam doesn't really get into specifics on how grouping works. You'll probably see a question on there, including a max aggregate function. And actually, I may have a question that we'll go over later that includes it. In terms of like performing an aggregate function, that's typically done in the select statement. So here you can see an example of select, and what we're going to do is we're going to count how many columns there are from a particular table name where certain conditions apply. All right. Let's talk about how to limit some of the results that we get from a query. We can perform certain caps on how much data we get back. Sometimes if we're testing a query out and we don't want to run it on all 10 million rows, and we just want to see how things are performing for the first 100 rows or for the first 10 rows, we can put in some limiters here. And that would be using the top clause right after our select. And so top is going to return however many rows we're going to specify. We can specify, a specific number, or we can select a specific percentage. And so if I wanted to pull the top 10% of a particular data set, I would write in select top and I would put in 10, and I would literally write % afterwards in order to specify the number or percentage of results to return. Then there is order by. Order by is not typically allowed in Marketing Cloud. I know that some folks are able to use that in classic SQL environments. Marketing Cloud does not typically allow it unless you're performing it with a limiting function. So if I wanted to find the top 10% of subscribers that have opened an email most recently, I would include an order by function in order to order my results by that particular field or value. I think I saw a question come in.
So I can read that question, Matt. So are indexed fields a thing in SFMC SQL? So example, would having more or no primary keys influence the performance of the queries?
So first, let's talk about indexing. Indexing fields is a thing, marketing, but how things get indexed and what gets indexed is entirely, not something that we have any control over. And so I would say you can probably try to optimize for indexing by including your column name before predicate. And so if we're trying to evaluate something true or false here, put the column name first instead of the predicate, and chances are you'll probably get that indexed better or faster. Let's see. Would having no or more primary keys influence the performance of queries? So now, would it impact the performance? I wouldn't say, I wouldn't definitively say yes or no here. Primary keys are kind of getting used here to prevent duplicates in the data extensions. And so, they would certainly help improve performance by eliminating the need to overwrite every time. Like I said before, when we're dealing with large data sets, primary keys would allow you to kind of only perform smaller updates and deltas. And so, yeah, I think they probably would help in that regard, but I don't think that they provide any extra indexing, and I don't think Marketing Cloud does any indexing on things that are identified as a key. All right. And then this is just a simple syntax for how to perform a top or order by. So if you wanted to pull the top 10%, you would include select top and include the number of 10. If it was percent, you'd have to write percent afterwards. And that's basically it. And so David's sending us a help file to a particular thing that we'll check out later. Thank you, David. And then let's go over converting data here. And so sometimes we have to be able to change the format of data in order to make comparisons here. And sometimes we need to convert data in order to meet certain data requirements within your data extension. So, you know, this is if we are creating like numeric data and we're pulling text data from a data extension, we would use things like convert or cast here. There's a distinct advantage to using convert over cast. Each one of them is basically going to be converting data from one type to another. The advantage of using a convert instead of a cast is that it's also going to give you some greater specificity into the style of that data. And so if it comes to like how money is being represented or how dates are being represented, you can certainly affect the style by using that in the convert. And one thing to notice is that cast has the string first and the format second, whereas convert has the format first and the string second, followed by style. All right. Finding unique records. So this is a, you know, occasionally you'll need to be able to find only one result per subscriber or one result per particular key value. And you can use something called select distinct in that way. It's only going to return unique or distinct values in a query. Values have to be distinct across all of the selected columns. So let's say I've got, I'm comparing customers with orders here. If there were duplicates of a particular customer, but I was joining it with order data, select distinct would still pull a unique row per order per user. And so it has to be unique across every single returned column. Yeah, and so it's, you know, depending on the fields that you're selecting, you can kind of use it as a way to eliminate any duplicates from your results. Let's talk about date-based functions here. So there's a lot of different reasons to use dates in Marketing Cloud and date-based functions. We're sometimes trying to gather lists of subscribers that have open data across a large variety of sends over a period of time, or you know, subscribers that have been created. We're constantly analyzing time in Marketing Cloud, and so there's a number of different ways for us to do that. So the first function is date diff, and that's kind of return the numerical difference between two dates given a particular date field. So comparing year versus year, day versus day, hours and minutes, they kind of tell you the difference between those two. And then there's date add. And so that is also going to perform math on two date parts and then return the result. And you can provide, and when I talked about date parts, you can also kind of analyze specific parts of a date, extract just the year, the month, or the day. If you need to refer to like the current system time, you can always refer to the get date function. If you want to be able to look at UTC time, use the get UTC date function instead. So let's look at some examples here on how to write some comparisons for dates. So if, for example, we wanted to return some results that contained dates from like 3 days before today's date, we could use a date get diff clause in the where. And then what we would do is we would include the function date diff, would declare the part of the date that we would like to compare, the day. We would choose the column that we are comparing here, and this would be some sort of date column, and then a date that we're going to be comparing it against, and that would be today's date. And so if the result is 3, then that means, so we're performing a comparison against whatever date field is in that row against today's date. And if the difference is 3, which would be 3 days before this particular day, then this would evaluate as true. If we wanted to return results containing days from like 30 to 60 days ago, we could also use a date add function. And so now date add is performing math on a date. And so we're going to get values instead. And so we'll subtract 60 days. And so in this function, we're kind of performing date add. We're going to compare days here. We're going to minus 60 days from today's date, and then 60 or 30 days before today's date as well. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to look at like whatever date column is being returned, and it must be between 60 days from today or 30 days from today. And bonus points will go to whoever can tell me why the second expression is better than the first. Drop it in the chat if you can. All right. Let's go over some functions on how to replace, locate, and trim data. And so we would use some of these functions in cases when we need to either identify certain characters within data that we need to either replace or locate, or trim out some parts of data that we don't necessarily need. White space can happen quite often when we're creating form-based fields and people are submitting forms. Sometimes they're putting in spaces before their email address or after, or their name. And so we may need to sometimes manipulate and delete that white space. And so that is actually at the bottom. So that's L trim and R trim. But left and right allows us to basically look at a string and then figure out if we're going to extract characters from from a particular column based off of however many we want to pull. So if we want to pull the first 3 characters of substrings from a particular string, we can use either left or right in order to do that. Character index allows us to kind of search through a particular string and try to find a substring, and then it returns that position and then returns the 0 if no substring is found. Often we're using char index with left and right. So let's say we want to be able to pull out a domain from an email address, or we want to be able to identify the local part of an email address. We might use char index with left and right. Char index is going to find the character position of the @ symbol, and then we can use left or right to kind of strip out either the data to the left of it or to the right of it. Replace is going to replace all instances of a substring with a provided string. And so what that means is we can provide a particular field, and if there are certain characters that we want to be able to remove and replace, we can just swap one for another. And I'll give you a real world scenario where that might be necessary and where that might actually come up on the exam. Then there is the character field. And so it's basically allows you to kind of provide a character based off of an ASCII code. And I'll give you a scenario that uses both replace and character together. And trailing white space is that L trim and R trim. So that will pull out any extra spaces before or after a string. All right, and so here is some typical syntax for all of those different functions all in one place. And then let's talk about some typical use cases. So if we wanted to actually remove a line feed, so let's say we've got a web-based form and someone puts in like an empty space after a particular field. We can use a combination of character and replace together. So if we're looking for a line feed, the ASCII number for a line feed would be 10. And then we could replace any of those line feeds with like an empty quote here, which is basically just going to delete it. Same thing works for carriage returns. And then we can actually do both of these things together in order to remove line feeds and carriage returns. You can see that what we're doing here is we're actually nesting some of these things together. All right, that covers the most of the functions that you'll expect to see on the developer exam. I'd hinted at this before. We're going to talk about a few best practices here. Use staging data extensions. If you have some really big, ugly data sets, you need to kind of do some complex joining of them into smaller stages. This will help you avoid timing out that 30-minute timeout. And so sometimes the other thing I'd recommend here is that kind of goes in hand with the last point here. Minimize the data that you're processing. If you really only need to perform data on a particular, if you need to run comparisons on strict fields, and that's going to take a lot of processing time, run your comparisons on the important fields first, pull in some key values, and then do a join afterwards. Sometimes that can help improve performance. So only select the fields and tables and records that you need to perform your function at that particular time. I've mentioned this before, use deltas, smaller types of update activities rather than overwrites if they're not needed. Avoid using wildcards. This is an important one, and this will actually come up in the exam. They will give you scenarios where they'll say, ask you to kind of select the ideal query in a given scenario. Wildcards work. They absolutely do in Marketing Cloud, and you can use wildcards. The only thing is that they're kind of they're kind of weird. So in a typical scenario, when you have a wildcard, you're expecting to return every single field in a data extension, which can be great. The weird thing about Marketing Cloud is that after you hit save, Marketing Cloud is going to optimize that query, and any fields that were there when you hit save, when it ran the wildcard, are going to get stored in the platform. And so if a field gets added after you hit save and save your query, it's not going to get picked up. Or if you remove a field, this is the killer when it comes to wildcards. If a field gets removed after you've saved your query, it will not detect that field because all of the fields that are in a data extension kind of get saved at manually behind the scenes. When you open that query up again, it's still going to show a wildcard. But like I said, when the system optimizes it, it's going to store all of those as kind of static field values. So removing a field from a data extension that's using a wildcard will cause that query to fail. All right. The other thing is that if you're a performance guru, try to avoid any character-based wildcards using things like, not in, not null. Whenever possible. They will decrease performance, and there's almost always a workaround. So sometimes, rather than having to use things like not exists or not in, try to run a join instead, and put your criteria in that join rather than using a not in or not exists. Are there any other best practices you can think of that you want to share, JB?
I think you covered it pretty well, Matt. I would like to highlight one important point to focus when you're preparing for the certification is that be thorough with the syntax. There are a couple of questions, maybe 4 or 5 questions that focuses on the syntax. So given a function, so what is the proper syntax? What are the parameters that go inside the function? This is something which you need to be thorough with. You can expect some questions around those, around the data add functions, these joins. And Matt, I think you covered everything so nicely. So you remember well from the exam, it seems.
Oh, cool. Thank you. One last thing that I'm going to cover over system is regarding system data views, and then we can close out the section on data manipulation. So system data views are basically, if you know what a data view is, it's essentially a representation of your system data in a form where It's kind of being placed in its own individual view. And so that would be a lot of different fields that Marketing Cloud is using to put together things like tracking information. That would be subscribers, bounces, opens, clicks, and jobs. We use data views a lot in Marketing Cloud, and we can use them for custom reporting. We can use them for kind of creating segmentation, especially if we need to kind of take a look at who received what and what they did. A lot of that's available through a system data view. They're more accurate than measures. So a lot of folks that have been using Marketing Cloud over the years have preferred to query system data views over measures, because they just like data to be as accurate and up to date as possible. Measures are kind of sampled over time, and so they're not nearly as up to date as something like a system data view. The only thing is that it's always a moving target with system data views, and only 180 days of data are preserved in most system data views. This is an important one, and this will absolutely come up on the test. There's some really great resources out there that I've linked on this slide. This is some schema data that someone's put together of all of the different data views and how they all relate to each other. Most of them are going to relate on the subscriber key, job ID, or subscriber ID. And so that should show as a common thread that ties all of them together. Yeah, and so, you know, I would say there's not a lot of stuff out there that's going to ask you for a lot of specifics. Know some of the basic data extensions that are system data views, like open and click and job. I would say definitely take a look at what data is in them. You don't have to know field level data in order to pass the exam on what's in a system data view. David's asking, is there any data view for mobile push send status? I know, I don't know. I know that there are some hidden data views out there that are not documented, and if you can find it, you can use it. I'm not 100% sure on mobile push send status. I know that there are some hidden ones out there in terms of like mobile connect, SMS, just not 100% sure on mobile push. But some of the documents that I got listed here, like especially this Salesforce marketing.cloud one, are going to list some of those hidden data extensions that you can access. The warning that I will give about some of the hidden data extensions is that Marketing Cloud doesn't guarantee that those are going to be available all the time. If they've documented it, then that means that it's going to be there forever. But until they've documented it, there's no promises or guarantees that it will be there. So again, yeah, if you can find it, you can use it. All right.
So I posted in the chat a post by Susanna. This is a very beautiful representation of all the data views and how they're linked together. And whenever you're writing some queries, this gives a better picture of what data views can be joined and what are the keys that are that can be used for the join. This is the updated one. I posted in the link as well.
Yep. And here's another, just to kind of go over how to reference data views in a query scenario. This is kind of a query where you'd be able to combine things like your job data view with your open data and your subscribers in order to find subscribers that have opened an email within the last 30 days. This is something that you can also do within a measure. I'm going to tell you that right now. And measures are able to do this a heck of a lot easier and faster in terms of a declarative interface. But the thing that people don't like about it is that it's sampled data and it's not always as perfectly up to the second accurate as a data view. And because of that reason, some people hate it. But the tool is available if you want to be able to try it, and if you want to put that power in your marketer's hands rather than out of your developer's hands. While we can always query data views, sometimes a measure can actually get us 98% of the way. All right.
Thank you.
Let's talk a little bit about send logs here. And we're nearing the end here. We've just got a couple of things left. We'll talk a little about how to kind of apply best practices here on send logs. Let's see here. Okay, Ricardo's got a good note there. So what are send logs? Not every single account is going to be, if you get a brand new Marketing Cloud account, it's not going to have a send log set up by default. It's something that you have to configure within each account. When you're setting it up. What is it? It is basically a templated data extension that's going to get a result added to it every single time an email gets sent for every single subscriber. So if you sent out 100 emails today, you get 100 rows in your send log data extension. It's going to log some basic information in them about the send, like the subscriber key and email and send date and some basic things that every send in the platform is going to have. And you can also add custom attributes to the send logging data extension to add other types of attributes that are available at send time. So for example, if all of your data extensions have a first name, last name, and you want to be able to put a first name, last name in your send log, when you send an email, as long as that is attribute data available at send time, it's going to get added to the send log. Why do we like using send logs? Send logs are a great tool for figuring out what a particular subscriber's state was at the time of send. Sometimes there's data that's just going to get overwritten from send to send, and a send log is going to preserve that. And so that could be like an email address. It could be anything related to a particular order or like order value. All those things are great things to kind of preserve in a send log. One other thing is that the dates are recorded. They're always recorded in UTC -6, and that's basically Central Standard Time. Yeah, lots of questions rolling in about send logs, I think. Let's see.
I'm happy to ask one of them. So this is one that says, do you have more detail on caching issues for the measures?
Yeah, I don't. This is one of those things where it's I don't know if it's very well documented.
Yeah.
I don't know the frequency of the caching. This is probably something that we'd be able to kind of dig into the product team and find out. My guess is it's at most once a day. It's if not more frequently cached than that.
That's perfectly understood. And thank you so much for giving us that answer. We have another one that just came in. It says, it's quite easy to create multiple send logs of the same type. When you inherit an established SFMC account, you might not know where this one active send log is located. Do you know of any methods for finding the active send logs?
Okay, so what Rafal is talking about here is that you are only allowed 2 send logs per account, one for email, one for SMS. And if you don't know where it is, sometimes it can be difficult to track down. It doesn't always look distinctly different from another data extension. Support can help you. They should be able to help you identify it. And so, David's kind of saying the same thing.
Yeah, thank you, David, and thank you, Matt. Great answer, great answer. We have about 2 more minutes. If anyone has any last follow-up questions pertaining to this topic and specifically test related, that would be really, really great. Let's see, we just got a big one. Trying to see if this is, all right, let's try.
We've got to get through one last thing real quick.
Oh, then let me go ahead and, yes.
I'll speed through the send logging best practices. You use Marketing Cloud recommends that you only store 10 days worth of data. Imagine an account that's sending millions of emails a day, and you can imagine why they would want you to only store 10 days worth of data. And also had 10 or fewer custom fields to the send log. The issue is performance here. We want to try to limit the really critical key information in a send log because it's very, very high frequency writes here. The other thing, and this is where things get a little silly, is if you need to be like reading from your send logs, they recommend that you don't read from your send logs at times that sends are happening. In big, large enterprise accounts, that's really hard to do. And so you might want to actually move that data out of a send log and into an archive where you can actually do some reporting on it rather than reporting on the live send log, and then have kind of a spot within your day where that process can get archived, so that you're not sending during those archiving times. So the other thing is that they tell you, that the send logging process could fail if there are any write issues with custom fields. So basically add them at your own risk. And so they're really up for you to manage at that point. Okay. And then we got to get through contact deletion. So I'll speed through this. Contact deletion is just simply the process of deleting contact in Marketing Cloud. And there are a few things that you need to know in order to answer any questions that are coming up on the exam. It's a 3-step process. Once you hit the delete button, depending on what your suppression period is, that contact may get deleted immediately. They may not. By default, every account is set up for it to have a default suppression period. And a suppression period is basically a time when the contact is not deleted from the system, but any emails that will go to that contact will not get sent. It basically is there as a kind of a safety measure to make sure that you're deleting that data from other supporting systems before it finally deletes it in Marketing Cloud. So it kind of holds that contact to prevents them from getting mail, transactional and commercial mail. And then once that suppression period is over, the contact's finally deleted. And then it will delete both the contact and any data that is in a sendable data extension, as well as any populations. So those will also get deleted as well. All right. Anything that is in a non-sendable data extension will not get deleted. So it's important for compliance reasons to understand this, because just because you deleted contact data doesn't mean that all PII has been removed from your system. Make sure that you know where PII is being stored in your platform so that you can delete it from any non-sendable data extensions if needed. Okay. Let's see. And then they kind of vary based on your account, and we're kind of getting into some specifics here that most people aren't going to encounter, but it does come up on the exam. They want to know like how the deletion process works per account. Most of the time we're dealing with Enterprise 2.0 accounts. And there are some lock and publish accounts out there on your behalf, and then agency and agency clients out there. If you're using an Enterprise 2.0 or an on your behalf, delete those contacts in the parent, and then they cascade down. If you're in lock and publish or an agency, the contact deletes will happen to each account, no matter what the organizational structure here is. All right, and one thing to also remember is that if you delete a contact after the suppression period and you did not delete it from any supporting system, it's going to get recreated in Marketing Cloud again. And so a thing that always gets me is that I see folks that delete the data in the CRM, it disappears from their view, but what happens is it actually goes to the recycle bin, and it's not really deleted, it's still in the recycle bin. They go through a contact delete process and the contact gets recreated, because sometimes the way people set up synchronized data extensions is that data that is still in the recycle bin will get synchronized back over. So setting up some filters there in your synchronization settings will prevent that from happening, but it's certainly something that I've seen before, and it can you can save yourself a lot of frustration by making sure you know what types of contacts are coming into the system, and then setting up a contact delete process that supports it. Other thing is, don't set your suppression period to 0 unless Marketing Cloud is the very last stop on a contact delete process. Make sure that that contact is gone from any like ERP or any system that could be providing data to Marketing Cloud. If if you can guarantee that, then you can set your suppression period to 0. A lot of people want to set their suppression period to 0 because they just want to delete contacts from Marketing Cloud and getting them out there as soon as possible. But you have to remember what the process is behind it, so that they're not just going to get re-added the next day. Okay, we did run over. We definitely have a lot of questions here. Hopefully we can get through some highlights. And if people have a little bit of extra time, we've got the Kahoot game, and I'm happy to stay after for a little while and kind of run it for folks that want to go through some sample exam questions. Question from Kyle is, will Journey email sends go into the send log? Yes, triggered email sends are essentially Journey email sends, and those should go into the send log. Let's see. What are some others here? I think that covers it for most of the questions here. Any other questions that anybody has that they want to go over?
I think we have covered all the questions so far.
Yeah, I was just about to say that. We have covered all the questions. Thank you so much, Matt and JB. If everyone, I do see that we're at 10:35. If everyone wants to, we can, for those who are interested in staying a little bit and playing the game, please feel free to go ahead and jump into the next link. For those of you who have to go, we understand. Matt, this was so helpful. We are truly, truly appreciative of your time. And thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, and glad I had a chance to present some of this material. With that, I'll kind of jump straight into the Kahoot game. Can you guys all see the Kahoot screen up?
For the latecomers, do you mind adding the link again?
Yeah, it's actually on the screen. So if you want to join the game, go to kahoot.it or join with the Kahoot app and then put in the game pin 7289867. Put in a nickname so you can identify yourself and get praise when you're the big winner. Anybody that is going to win the game does have to out themselves, but you can always send an email to JB and say, hey, I was ATL, for example, and I'm the big winner today. We're kind of going on our honor system here. So yeah, so I'll give it like a couple of minutes for people to get the page loaded up, get their usernames created, and we'll get started here in a couple of minutes. If you haven't played Kahoot before, it's kind of a basic trivia game. And so we're going to be going through some multiple choice questions. I've got a couple practice questions in a practice round so that you all get a sense of the kind of the feel for the game. And then we'll get into it. And you're going to be scored based off of not only questions that you get correct, but how quickly you can answer some of these questions. So people that are fast on the trigger with the right answer are definitely going to outpace some of the folks that take more time to make their decisions. So be careful, but also be quick.
We have some pretty good participation in the room today. This is great. Look at everyone.
Got a lot of competitors for the big prize.
Oh yeah. Well, whoever is ATL, I'm rooting for you. Just gonna go ahead and say that now.
All right, I think we'll just give it maybe half a minute before we get things going here. So we've got about 31 people still in the chat, and we got about 21 people. So there's like between G and Jasna and me, I think there's only about half a dozen folks that have yet to register. If you just want to watch, that's also fun too. We got some stuff popping up in the chat, some questions here, maybe.
I think some people are just saying thank you for your help. Yeah, just giving some good feedback. Thank you for the wonderful session. Great job. People are excited. David is saying, let's go. I love the energy. So yeah, I mean, a lot of people are saying just thank you so much for your help.
All right. Well, I think we'll get started then. Here we go. Marketing Cloud Developer Exam Trivia. I'll start out with a couple of practice questions and then we'll get right into it. First one, what is the name of this horrifying Salesforce mascot? Is it Snappy? Is it Sassy? Is it Chatty? Or is it Baphomet? Remember, the quicker you can answer a question, the more points you'll score. And every question is timed. Most of the questions are going to be 20 seconds, but some of them will be 60 if there's longer stuff to kind of sift through. All right. So the correct answer is Chatty. 7 of you got that correct, and 3 of you have a good sense of humor.
Ha! I got that right.
All right. Like I said, that's a practice question that wasn't scored. The next one is another practice question. What is a poor study method for the Marketing Cloud Developer Certification Exam? Is it read Salesforce documentation on best practices, memorize the answers from the practice exams, review content from the Marketing Cloud Developer Bootcamp series, or practice your concepts and ask questions? Now, the question is, what is a poor study method for the Marketing Cloud Developer Certification Exam? Almost all got it. Memorize the answer from the practice exams. Boo, we don't want to do that. We want to know things. We want to know the concepts. All right. So now let's get into the questions where we've got point values. So here's the first one. Read and respond to the question below. This is a long question. A file with encrypted customer data is delivered to the Marketing Cloud Enhanced SFTP at midnight on a nightly basis, which then needs to be used to update a master subscriber data extension. What is the best process to import this customer data into Marketing Cloud? Is it a file drop automation, then an import activity and a file transfer activity? Is it a file drop automation with a file transfer activity followed by an import? Is it a scheduled automation with an import activity? Or is it a scheduled automation with an import activity followed by a file transfer activity? Now, some of you may be able to realize that there's probably not a lot of big differences between a couple of these. And in these questions and in these exams, we always want to find what is the better option between two. The answer is a file drop automation, where we then do a file transfer activity and an import activity. So the file transfer activity is going to decrypt that file, and then the import activity is going to put it into the system. And the reason why we want a file drop automation over a schedule is as soon as that file hits the FTP, we want to process it. Whereas a schedule is kind of, sometimes it could hinge on if a file gets skipped or if it doesn't land the FTP. The process could run anyway. So file drop automation is really making sure that it only runs when a file gets added. Let's see how we did. GK is in the lead with 796 points. Way to go, GK. Next up, read and respond to the question below, another long one. Every night, Horizontal Digital wants to send a CSV file of new subscribers to an external SFTP for central reporting and processing. What method should the Salesforce Marketing Cloud developer use to export this data? Should they do a scheduled automation and a file transfer, scheduled automation, a fire event, and a file transfer? Do they do a scheduled automation, a data extract, and a file transfer? Or is it a scheduled automation, data warehouse activity, and file transfer activity? 30 seconds. 18 of you got it right. That would be a scheduled automation where we're going to extract the data from a data extension, and then we're going to do a file transfer to move it to the FTP. Good job. Let's see who answered it quickest. Okay, we got Rafal coming into first place with 1,653 points. Here comes the next one. How long should data be retained in a send log? Is it 180 days? Is it 60 days? Is it 10 days? Or is it 30 days? Best practices here. All right, that's correct. 10 days is the answer. That is the recommendation from Salesforce. Let's see how we did. Ali is taking the lead. Way to go, Ali. How many email send logs are allowed within a Marketing Cloud account? Email send logs. Is it as many as can be handled by system performance? Is it 1 per account, 1 per business unit, or it depends on the type of account? 5 seconds. All right, and 9 of you got the correct answer. That is 1 email send log per account. So that means regardless of how many business units you have, you can only have one per account. They often are operated out of the parent. Kyle D takes the lead with 3,398 points. Way to go, Kyle. Where do contacts need to be deleted in an Enterprise 2.0 account? Is it in all subscribers? Is it from any business unit by a user with admin permissions? Is it only through the REST API or SOAP API? Or is it from the parent business unit? That's correct. 19 of you got it from the parent BU. Boy, we've got a close game. There's less than 300 point spread between first place and fifth place. Way to go, Kyle. You're on fire. Next question, what is a contact deletion suppression period? Is it a time where contacts can't receive any email before deletion? Is it a cruel joke for admins who want to delete contacts quickly? Is it a method to prevent contacts from being deleted by users accidentally? Or is it a time where contacts cannot receive commercial email before deletion? Tricky questions here. There's only one right answer with 6 seconds left. Let's see what the right answer is. It is a time where a contact cannot receive any email before deletion. That's both transactional and commercial. Ali takes the lead with a bigger spread here. Way to go, Ali. Next question. This one is for double points. How much historical data is kept in most system data views? Is it 365 days? Is it 180 days? Is it 90 days, or I wasn't paying attention? 10 seconds. The next questions are all worth double points, so it is an opportunity for people to completely catch up on the first half of the game and come ahead from nowhere. So yeah, 17 of you got that question right, and Ali continues his lead at 69-11. Next question for double points again. Read and respond to the question below. A developer wants to write a query to compile data originating from an HTML form. However, the source data extension contains line breaks within the comments field, making the data difficult to read and sort. Which SQL functions could be used to change each line break to a single space? Is it replicate and nchar? Is it replace and char? Is it ltrim and rtrim? Or is it format and space? You got plenty of time to make the right choice here. You got 30 seconds. We went over this example earlier in the presentation. I actually gave an example for this very scenario. 15 seconds. All right, yep, that is correct. The answer is replace and char. So char identifies the line break and replace gets rid of it and adds a space. How do we do? Ali is smoking. He's got 8,597 points, but Carr is coming threatening in 5th place here. Second to last question at double points. What SQL functions shown below allow results to be aggregated? Choose 2. These are aggregate functions. Choose 2 aggregate functions here. Is it average? Is it top? Is it distinct? Or is it min? 5 seconds. All right, the answers are average and min. Distinct pulls unique results, and then top also is a limiter. So we want average and min. Great job. Ali is still in the lead. Last question for double points. Horizontal wants to add the most recent order number, if available, to each customer record. What function would be best? This is a tricky one. Would they do a left or right join? Would they do a full outer join? Would they do an inner join or a cross apply join? We want to add the most recent order number, if it's available, to each customer record. What function would be best? That's right. The left or right join is the answer. So that concludes the game. Let's figure out who's on the podium. So in third place with 9,900 points is Kyle. Second place with 10,324 is ATL. And first place with 11,539 points is Ali. Way to go, Ali. You're our big winner today. You should go take the Marketing Cloud Developer exam right after this session.
Congratulations, Ali. Please let me know your email ID so we can communicate and work on the swag item for you.
Good job, guys. Good job, Cal. Good job, ATL. Good job, Ali.
Hope you guys
I
had
knew
a lot of
ATL was
fun.
going to win it. Didn't I say ATL was going to be up there? I said it. I claimed it. Great job today, Matt. Huge job. Very love your game. Your game was super fun and definitely out of the box thinking. So thank you so much.
Thanks, gang. It's been great working with you. Hope to see you. Please reach out on LinkedIn if you'd like to. Otherwise, we'll hopefully see you at another user group sometime.
And thanks for a wonderful
Thank you.
session, Matt. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Will there be a link of the presentation on the chat for download? Okay.
We will upload the presentation into the drive. We might have shared that in the Slack channel. If not, please reach out to me. I will share the location.
Okay.
And
Sure.
the recording will be, recording will be uploaded soon after the.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks, everyone. And hope to see you all again in the next session. But next Tuesday, 9 p.m. as usual. Take care and have a good one. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, guys. Thank you all. Yeah.